Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Wherever you are in the world today, I hope that you and your loved ones are doing great. And most importantly, my friends, I hope that you are in good health. Once again, welcome to the Common Sense channel. On this channel, we get to talk about those things that people know, that people have thought about, but don't often have the time to discuss. These, my friends, are the things we talk about here on the Common Sense channel. So once again, welcome to the Common Sense channel. So today we want to talk about something that I title The Power of the Human Spirit. And we want to connect this to three elements that showcase the power of the human spirit. That would be slavery, colonialism, and neo-colonialism. Why am I talking about this? Because I've done a video, and then on this video I was talking about how black people need to come together. Some people are not okay with it. That's fine. But in order for me to talk about that, there must be a history. There's always a history for a people. There's always a history to a people, to a community, to a race. The only way you don't know these histories is when someone hid them from you. But in our world today, we can almost find almost anything that we want to know about who we are, where we are from, and how we got here. You can know these things because they are right in front of you. But not all of us have the time, the privilege to get this information. I've always been under the impression that information was always hidden, especially when it comes to the black race. So I'm going to look at resiliency. I'm going to look at determination. I'm going to look at hope. And I'm going to look at strength of a race of people today. As I've always done on my channel, I've always reach out to the ancestors. I reach out to them based on what I know of them now. And I reach out to them because they are part of us. There is no way we can extract ourselves from them. There's no way we can, because they are us and we are them. We are, my friends, the representation on earth, whether you know or not. So let's look at slavery. Slavery was the worst thing that ever happened to a race of people. There were Arab slaves, there were European slaves, there were slaves all over the planet. This is not new. And all of this right here that resulted to slavery was justified by a religious text or by religious books or religious doctrine. Whether they want to accept it, whether they want to believe it, whether they want to see it as true or facts, it's up to them. We know they are the architect of all of the things that are happening to our world today. It hasn't meant they have not one day come up and say we were wrong. At least this generation should do that. So let's look at strength and slavery. Let's look at resiliency and slavery. There is a movie called The Roots. Why did I watch that movie? I've seen it maybe about 4 times or maybe 5 times since I've been in this country. It's not a movie you want to watch if you're not strong, if you cannot control your emotion. You don't want to watch The Roots. But I think you should watch it. Why is that? Because it's good to know history, whether it's factual, if it's not factual, but it tells of a human being, a man, a slave that wouldn't accept a name because it didn't belong to him. It talks of a people that had to endure the harshest situation and emerge out of that situation stronger, better, and that resulted to this generation today. So it's always good to know, because you learn that, and then you know yourself, and then you channel a new path. That's why history is always important. If you watch other culture, they come into the fore and they look at what the ancestor had done. They look at what the ancestor had gone through, and they say, no, we will not tolerate this. We will not allow this to happen. We will do whatever we can to prevent this from happening, because our ancestors had gone through that, and we will not allow the next generation to endure that or to experience that. You understand? So you always learn from your history. We had a civil war. The generation now that are in our country that survived that war, they know, they experience it. So they're going to tell that to their children. And they are going to, if they are in power now, if they're in office running a country, they're going to make sure that that never happened, because they had experienced it. So your history is very important. So when we talk of slavery, we're not talking of something that was good for humanity, especially the black race. We're talking about something that was dehumanizing, that was humiliating, that was just brutal and wrong. Our world, if this generation can retroactively put themselves in that time and then come back into this world, the entire mindset will be changed about what the ancestors, especially those who were involved in that brutal, dehumanizing way of life. But all of the actions were justified by religious texts, facts. You understand? So it take a generation of people from that race to shape their own destiny or their destiny. So today when we talk of people like John Peters that left Nova Scotia with a group of settlers that had helped fight alongside the British during the American Revolutionary War, that would later on settle. They'd never been to Africa, especially West Africa. But there were records from each of these slave ships. And if you don't know, every slave ships that ever sailed to Africa during the turn of the 16th centuries, or maybe from not the 15th centuries, during the early portion of the 16th centuries, they all had records of all these people. They had records of the counts of them. So this, it's not like the record wasn't there, but you needed a system to help these people find their way. But when the abolition movement to end slavery was founded, it wasn't founded on the basis of morality. It wasn't founded on the basis of saying we're going to eradicate slavery completely. It was founded, this is me retelling the history now, because whatever was told in our book or in movies are wrong. It was founded, the abolition movement to end slavery, my friends, were founded primarily on the idea of economics. And I've often said this, if Africa were not evaded by slavery, by religion, by conquest, by greed, by economics, Africa would have been alongside with the rest of the world as far as the industrial revolution is concerned. I'm making the case for Africa. That's what I'm doing. So I'm doing this video so you can understand the plight of the African race. Has nothing to do with racism. Because anyone that think that you're not getting the point, there's no way we're going to shy away from our history. Our histories are our history. Just like you talk about your history, you're proud of it. So when I did that video where I talk about evil is actually born, I was looking at this element to do that video. So I've always done, every time I do my video, I'm like piecing these things together. If you just pay attention, you see it's a trend. You understand? So evil is born. The reason is simple. The generation that was responsible for the worst atrocities in human history that ever happened to mankind, slavery, they are long been dead and gone. But why are we still experiencing elements of slavery in our world today? It's no longer slavery, and I'll get to there, because when they abolished slavery or the slave trade, not slavery, but slave trade, because even though they abolished slave trade, but there were still slaves in America. Our black brothers and sisters were still here from Africa that had settled here. And the worst ever treatment any human being can ever experience in their life was happening to them. So they end slave trade. They were like, hooray, we end slave trade. So now we're going to develop a new concept that the world has never seen before. Because now we are moving into a new industrialized world where we don't need, we do need human labor, but we don't want them on the ocean anymore. We don't want to transport them because it's very costly for us to do that. So now we're going to keep these people in their homeland. And then we're going to keep them there. We're going to get the materials we need now for our industries. And not only that, we're going to make them to work there instead of here. Because we don't want too many of them here. We want them to stay over there, and then they can do everything there. And then we still keep an eye on them. Just like how it's like a huge plantation, because that's what Africa became, a huge plantation of workers. I spoken to my grandma about this. She saw it because she was born 1926. So she understood what was happening then. In those days, in colonial Africa, a lot of black sisters and brothers don't know this. The Africans could not vote. The Africans had no say in the governance, how they sell their product, how the products are, the raw materials, how they're extracted from the land. They had no say in that. They had chiefs, but those chiefs were just there. It was something, especially in British, English Africa, and French Africa, and Portuguese Africa, and Spanish Africa, and Dutch Africa. You understand? These places, they all had lords, and their lords and nobles those chiefs were just indirect rule. They were not direct rule. all of these colonies in Africa, or German Africa, they had their governance, they had governors, they had people that were running the affairs of these colonies that were not Africans. And the Africans, the only thing they could do was to be a subject. They couldn't vote. They had no say in the laws of their countries. They couldn't go to school. If they did go to school, it was strictly based on whoever was running their colonial affairs. If it was Germany, yes. If it was England, yes. France, yes. All of these people, man. So you need to understand where the Africans have come from. But in spite of all these, where they made mistakes, because the early educational system in Africa was based primarily on like just learn what they call, man, and there's a name for it, but they just taught them the basic things like to read, to understand certain words. That was it. It wasn't beyond that. It was just, most of them learned the Bible. They would teach them. I remember a song when I was a little boy. They used to say, learning is better than silver and gold. Learning is better than silver and gold. So that's what we used to sing. Learning is better than silver and gold. Imagine that. I remember as a little boy singing that song in school, elementary school. Primary school, yeah, but mostly grammar school, elementary school. We thought learning is better than silver and gold. You understand? That song was passed down. So imagine what they were teaching these people. You're not teaching them what they needed. They were teaching them to memorize. It's still in Africa today. We're not teaching them to comprehend, like to use whatever they've learned, to use it in a comprehensive way. Or in other words, they're not teaching them critical thinking. They're just teaching them to just understand their immediate environment and just do, just like, I just want to teach you a point where you just know how to write all my paperwork and give it to me. But you're not understanding the intricacy of what you're giving to me, but you're just understanding it. And you still see that in Africa. In some of the court system in Africa today, they still practice. They wear that wig on, they go into court and they say, your Lord, your honor, Lord, sister. And so and then they talk about decolonizing. That's so stupid. You're still practicing everything the colonizer left with you. And you talk about decolonizing. You have a long way to go. So the ancestors before them were fighting against that. These ones, they're not even trying to change none of that. The same court system that was given to them by the colonizers, same thing they practice today. They dress the same way. You go to Nigeria in the court, you see them wearing the same wig. Some of these wigs, they're blonde hair. They're not even African hair though. They put that on their head and they go to court and they're talking like they're British. If they're French, they talk like they're French. So that's the kind of education Africans were having in colonialism, in colonial Africa. You understand? So, where they made a mistake, my friends, was when they started sending these Africans to places like America, places like England, places like France, Paris. They started sending people from La Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, sending Africans from places like Ghana, the Gold Coast. They started sending Africans from places like Nigeria. I mean, I have all the names, man. They started sending Africans from places like Senegal, the Gambia, places like Kenya, South Africa. They started sending these people to Europe to learn. Some came to America, as in the case of the great Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Now you see it, right? Now I'm going to tell you why they don't do that no more. So when these Africans came to America, to England, to France, to other parts in Africa, I'm not going to even mention Russia, because Russia is a different story. Russia has always been a different story. But let's just focus on this European country, especially France. The treatment these people saw in France equipped them, especially Antioch. You can read about Antioch and you see, when Antioch went to France, he saw something. It was just like that because they had different intention, but their masters that sponsored their education in these countries, they were thinking the opposite. They were thinking that these individuals would go to these countries, get an education, come back to Africa, and just write and read for them, run the affairs. So they were about to transition from colonial. I think they saw the writing on the wall, and they were about to transition. Remember, you had the First World War, and then you had the Second World War. They're always planning. These people fought 100 years war. That's why today when I look and see, I say, where is Ukraine war going? Because Europeans are notorious for fighting themselves. Like, you just need to read their history. Sometimes I say, why don't they just sit down and learn from their history? Because whenever they fight, they're not fighting, they fight nasty. So that's why I hope they don't fight, because sometimes when they do, it affects the whole world. But they don't shy away from fighting. But yeah, when these Africans came back to Africa, these colonizers, right, they were like celebrating. They were happy. But when these guys came back, their experience in the country, the people they met in the country, everything they had endured in these countries before they even left for Africa. And if you don't know, some of these individuals came from the elites in Africa. Some of them were chief children. Some of them some of their parents were paramount chiefs. You understand? They came from the elite class in Africa. Even in colonial era, there were elites, African elites. So they understood. They never forgot what their ancestors had gone through. So they just compiled all of that together. So when they came back, they started agitating. And they became agitators. They started demanding for change. They started demanding for control of their own affairs. And then when this is World War I, because a lot of people don't know, World War I, aka European Civil War, there were a lot of Africans, not just on the continent, from all across the globe that went to fight in Europe. That's why we should hope and pray Europe does not descend into war. Because now they may not do it, because if they do that now, no African country are going to go fight a war. So Europe, please, don't descend into war. There maybe some of them that need money may go there. I see some of them in there now, but it's not gonna happen like it did during the first European Civil War and the second European Civil War. It's not gonna happen. So the second European Civil War, my friends, was the catalyst for what shaped everything. Because in that environment, or in that situation of the second European Civil War, there came the idea of self-determination. At this time, you have most of these Africans in Europe going to school, and they start to exploit, especially individuals like Leopold Songa of Senegal. Leopold Songa is a Black African scholar. Individual like Kwame Nkrumah. All these people, they're already here. And I'm not going to talk about the Caribbean, like people like, just remember his name, but there are a great many men that came. I think I saw it, but for this video, I can't remember. But yeah, all these people were meeting in Africa, in Europe. They were talking to each other. I mean, Africans now, sons and daughters of Africans. They were talking, they were discussing, what is self-determination? What does that mean? So when Europe became weaker, because right after World War II, aka European Civil War, Europe was weak, weak in terms of Economics, they were weak. In terms of infrastructure, everything was destroyed. There were a few things that were left, especially in places like Germany. You know, most of Europe was down. They were poor. You know, it was a tough time. So the Africans, they saw that. And they were not doing well to the point where they couldn't even control the colonies. They couldn't run the affairs of the colonies because they were not doing well. So the Africans saw that. And that's the reason why today, when an African comes to this country to learn, the system don't want them to go back. Because imagine someone with a nuclear physicist or engineering or civil engineer, nuclear engineering, whatever that degree is, and that knowledge and understanding comes here and get that education. And if they ever take that back home, see what that could do for the continent. More or less reaching out to our African, black brothers in this country. Just one individual alone causing big trouble. In Africa, W. Du Bois, and then people from the Caribbean, you know. So yeah, so that's the reason why today you see Africans, when they come here, they don't want them to go back. They want them to stay. But whatever is happening in our world today, especially in this country, will lead to that, because more and more Africans are going to be like, okay, well, it's time for me to go back and contribute to my continent, to my country. I don't like to say country because I don't see Africa as that. I just see it as a continent. And that's how I think we should see Africa, as a continent. We shouldn't see it as a country. Although they say I'm from this country, from that country, this from this country. But when we look at Africa, if we're to unite, we must look at Africa as on the basis of a continent. Let's start looking at it from that lens, and then it'll start to make sense. Unity. Most people don't like Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln was the one that told the country that, look, we're not going to divide this thing. This thing right here, the United States is going to be United States. Even if I have to send every sons and daughters to defend that, it will happen, including mine. Because a lot of people know Abraham Lincoln went on the battlefield. He was on the battlefield, man. He was on the battlefield, Abraham Lincoln. And that's what this generation is. You're fighting a battle against the new form of colonialism. That's the one I want to talk about. It's called neo-colonialism. Neo-colonialism is the reason why it's powerful, because neo-colonialism is very strategic, very intellectually sound, uses brute force, but use it with intelligence. You cannot fight neo-colonialism with emotion. Not going to work. You have to be strategic. You have to think. That's why I keep telling you, think. That's why I keep talking about emotion. During the war, I've seen this. All those people that are very emotional, because emotion can lead to fear. I think one of the main elements of emotion is fear. Fear of the unknown. That's why people are able to join you up against another person, because you fear that something is going to happen in your environment, your community, that would take away from you or affect your lives one way or the other. So emotion creates fear. All those people that are scared doing war, they're the first to go. The ones that are not emotional, because they're reserved. When they look at the situation, they kind of analyze it and they know which way to go. They hold back and they look at that situation and they push on. But they're pushing on based on how they're analyzing that situation. Emotion would not allow you to do that. So neo-colonialism, that's the battle of this century. As did all of our ancestors from every phase of their lives, from slavery to colonialism to now neocolonialism, they've always been able to triumph with courage, with strength, with hope and resiliency. These elements has always been the guiding light to the triumphant, to their hope, to everything that they've done. So this generation now can be able to continue from wherever they've left off. You're fighting a very powerful force. And like I said, if evil is from the outside, then it's easier to eradicate. But evil is born because the generation of those who ran colonialism, us who were behind slavery, they all are dead now. They've gone. But why is it that it's keep changing from one phase to another? Because that chain has been passed down to another generation that figure out a new way to continue the same process. And then that gene has been passed down to another generation that figure out a way to continue the process. So it went from slavery to colonialism, from colonialism to neocolonialism now. And all of these generations are basing all of the action on the history of the ancestors. So in order for you to fight that, you must know your history. You must know your history and you must embrace it, because they are looking at what their ancestor has done in order for them to survive. Without what the ancestor did, there's no way they would have survived. And they must continue. So for instance, colonialism in Africa, main purpose was to get raw material. Now, how did they do it? They put in place people who would suffer, who were weaker, who didn't care about the people, the country, the love of country. They didn't care what they were doing as long as they were enriching themselves and their class of people. You understand? I call them the elite. So they didn't care what was happening, whether the country was being drained, because colonialism put them there. So when neocolonialism came, it said, well, we already have the blueprint because our forefather has already laid this for us. So we just need to reach out to all these people, these contacts. Oh, the Yambe family. The Yambe family has always been our bedrock in Africa, or the Timba, or the Luwik people, or the Yoruba tribe, or the Hausa tribe. These are the people we can go to, or the Limba, or the Mende, or the Timini. We can go to these people. They're going to get us what we want. Let's put them in office. You understand? So this how, or the Kukuyu, just stuff like that. The foundation, the structure is already there. So how do you fix that problem to deal with neocolonialism? Because you can sit there and blame neocolonialism all you want. The ancestors already built this infrastructure for them. So they're just reaching out to their connection. So if someone say, okay, you look at, let me take for instance, say, John Lewis is an African. He came to America, got an education, now is in Africa. His entire mindset is based on Western education. And he's part of the elite. So he came to one of the universities in this country or in Europe, if I want to get something done, I reach out to him. The infrastructure is already there. I don't need to go looking here and there. And if I want certain things from that country, I put him in office. I just say, hey, man, I'm going to promote you to a minister, so and so. Or you're going to be the president. So all these people talking about getting rid of neocolonialism, you have a long way to go. You have to take care of the infrastructure first. Deal with the education system. Deal with religion. Religion is part of that too. Everywhere you go, you're going to find these things. So the ancestors were more resilience, we're more determined, we're more hopeful, we're more intelligent, we're more had strength, had tenacity to fight for what they would pass down to the generation of blacks in Africa. And you can find that across the globe too, where black people are. They are not hoping, they are not dreaming like the ancestor did. You understand? Some are, I'm not going to say all of them, but I think it has to be a different level of education, a different level of awakening for these people to finally find themselves and say, what are we doing all this time? And I'm hopeful that that time will come. And if not, that time is already here. It just need that awakening for people to wake up and start to see that these are your problems. These people, these sets of people, these elites are your problem. And they look like you too. You see this in country. The black man can never do for another black man. In America, they appoint some of these leaders, whether they're in the Republican Party or in the Democrat Party, they never do anything for their community. They never. Because that's not the reason why they're there. And this is true. And then the reason is they want to keep this narrative going on. The white man, blame the white man. Go to places like Maryland, where it's predominantly black people, or places like Detroit, predominantly black people. Because the more people that you have in your community that looks like you, that's power. It's called democracy, right? But yet they put people in places that should be representing that community, and they're not. It's the same case in Africa too. You see, so you can see the link. And that's why we keep telling you, like, there's a link, whether here in the Caribbean or in South America. It's maybe in South America, like I would say in South America is a different place. But in this country and across the globe, it's the same thing. You know, they put in place these people that look like you, but they're not going to represent you. They are the part of the elite. You understand? And the elite like two things. They like power. The elites are entitled. They feel entitled. And they would do anything to keep it going. They don't care. They'll come and tell you sweet talk. They tell you what you need to hear. They prey on your emotion. And they say, hey, look at the boogeyman right there. They like to use white people as the boogeyman, you know. But meanwhile, they are representing a power that's bigger than that white brother or white sister. That has nothing to do with your problem, I'm telling you. But they have to use that as a leverage to stay in power. It's time you wake up and see that. And say, we're going to choose we. And this is for this country, anywhere around the world, including Africa. It's time you wake up and say, this is going to be about me. It's going to be about my family. It's going to be about my community. It's going to be about the people I love. Because you work with some people that don't look like you, Hispanic, white, black, from other countries. They have nothing to do with your problem. You elect people into office. That's why I'm an independent. You elect people into office that are not designed to help you. Their goal is not to help you, because even if they try, the system would not allow them. They can give you like crumbs. You know, crumbs, the crumbs off that table, they can drop that to you, but that's about it. They're not going to better your life. They're not going to do things that will help you. It's the same thing, the same narrative in Africa with neocolonialism. Neocolonialism put in place people, so-called leaders in Africa, that their sole goal is not to help the people. It's just to give them crumbs and make them live in hellhole, as the president would say. And sometimes you want to say the president is wrong, but he's pointing out these things. He's doing it maybe not by, maybe the ancestors are pushing him to say that. I believe this stuff. Because some of the things the president says, I don't think that if they're coming out that way, they're coming out from a place of truth. You understand? And that truth is spearheaded by the ancestors, so you can hear it, so you can start to understand. These people over here in Africa, and maybe in some part of this country or in this country, they operate the same level as the elites in Africa. You understand? Where they can only give you crumbs, but those things that will make your life better, those things that will uplift you, those things that will elevate you, you are not going to get them. So when you go to vote, next year is coming. When you go to vote, don't vote for these people based on the color of their skin. The color of your skin is important, but it's the way you think. If the people that looks like you, as in the case of Africa and in the case of this country, if they're thinking like you, vote for them. Elevate them. If they're on the ground looking at the situation of your people, your community, and they are talking about addressing these problems, and you know they are genuine about that, elevate them. Strengthen them. They don't have to come from the elite. Study their background too. Know who they are. Know what they represent. And then elevate them. That's what you're supposed to do. The ancestors before you, they did that. And you should continue. Every generation takes off from where the ancestor left off. So when you see colonialism, what they're doing, they're only playing by the playbook of the ancestors. You know, the ancestors created this institution, this infrastructure. So they're just picking back from whatever the ancestors had created for them. So it is you that should look at that situation and say, we're going to take off from wherever our ancestors had left off. Your ancestors were fighting for unity. Your ancestors were fighting for justice. Your ancestors were fighting for equality. Your ancestors were fighting against injustice, racism, slavery, colonialism, neocolonialism, and the ills of our society. They were fighting for that. They don't have to. No one should have to fight for equality. No one should be given to you because it was given to you at birth. So it should be yours. But why do you have to fight for it? It's because there's always someone trying to take it away. If they're not able to take it away, they're trying to minimize it. If not trying to minimize it, they're trying to destroy it. So you must always be alert. Wake up, learn, open your eyes. Don't allow emotion to have the best of you. As I've always said, I want to thank everyone that subscribed to my channel. I want to thank those that continue to support and watch my videos. I hope that you are doing great. I hope that you and your family are in good health. As I've always said again, the greatest thing that could ever happen to anyone is not the day you were born, not the day you had your first car, the day you graduated from high school, college, the day you became a lawyer, a doctor, whatever it is that you're working on, my friends. The greatest thing that could ever happen to you is the day you discover yourself. Because from that day on, my friends, everything will start to make sense to you. Have a blessed day and stay safe. Thank you. Thank you.